Thanks for tuning into another talk here at the Product Led Festival. Hope you're enjoying the event so far, because we've got even more juicy knowledge and insights from product-led pioneers heading your way. Remember to have your questions ready and get the tailored answers you need from the experts themselves. Sit back and enjoy.
Hello everyone, I'm Sally Foote and I'm the VP of e-commerce at GoCompare. In 2015, someone predicted the pandemic, and it wasn't just a bloke in the pub to his mates, it was actually at a TED talk, and it was Bill Gates. And what he said was that when he was growing up, the thing that everyone was most worried about, the biggest kind of threat to humanity was a nuclear disaster, but that wasn't really the case anymore. The thing that we most need to be afraid of in the next few years was a virus. If he was so inclined, he could probably feel a little bit smug about having called 2020. Even if you set aside the extraordinary circumstances in which we found ourselves in the last 12 months, predicting the future is hard. And yet, it's something that we as managers of products, as managers of people, as managers of teams, as managers of businesses are asked to do pretty much every single day. When is it going to happen? How long is it going to take? What's the outcome going to be? Bill Gates is a man who gets a lot of things right. Does he have a pair of magic goggles that enable him to see into the future? He does not. He uses data and he looks for precedent and he overlays his experience and collaborates with experts and he stitches all of these things together to be able to deduce what the most likely outcome is. And for us to answer these types of questions that we get asked every day, the process is exactly the same. We need to do exactly the same thing. We need to take data and we need to understand the signs and signals we're seeing. And then we need to use our experience to determine what the most likely outcome is going to be. And that all sounds really simple, doesn't it? It sounds theoretically super simple. But then when you try to do it, you start to realize that the thing you're trying to predict is usually your team or the people in your team and how they're going to behave. And that isn't as easy because people are not as predictable as pandemics. Well, the good news is that while we might not be able to predict exactly how our team members will behave, we can absolutely work out every single day whether our teams are going to be successful or not. And once we know that, of course, we can intervene to help ensure that they're successful. So if you were going to make yourself a pair of magic goggles that allowed you to see into the future, the first lens that you would want on those goggles would be the ability to see whether you're all looking at the same horizon. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, do you have a shared vision of what success is, what it will look like when you get there? And do your team have that same vision? To know whether you're going to succeed, whether your team are going to succeed or fail, you have to start with a shared definition of what success looks like. In 2012, Sky launched Now TV, and they needed to. They really needed to compete with Netflix. And they initially, the idea for the proposition was sort of low cost, high quality content, very much head to head with Netflix. But then it very quickly became clear that people who had a Netflix account tended to also have a Sky account. And so they quickly realized that if they didn't differentiate these propositions, they were going to be cannibalizing their own base, the main Sky store subscription product, the main Sky subscription product. And so they realized they had to differentiate the Now TV proposition. They had to look at it very differently. And that for them started with a mission statement. And their mission statement was to make it easy to find the content you love. But a mission statement doesn't tell you where you're going. A vision does that. And their vision, which needed to deliver on that mission, and then it informed every aspect of the product design, the proposition, the user experience, the branding, etc., was pay light or no contract commitment. So the ability for a customer to cancel at any point, to appear, disappear, come in and come out as they liked. So it was the total opposite to the core, very kind of sticky Sky subscription. And that meant that they could have two very different propositions alongside each other in market. And it also gave them a differentiator against some of their competitors. And then that vision also helped them to launch new products and propositions as they went forward. So in 2016, when they launched broadband, they asked themselves, how should Now TV do broadband? What does Paylight look like for broadband? And of course, it was no contract broadband, a completely unique proposition at the time. The clarity and consistency of that vision was one of the things that helped them to grow their user base by nearly 800% in 5 years. Having a vision is the first thing, right? But you also need to be able to see that your team can see how to get there. They have to have a plan to get there. And what's really important about that plan is that they need to have made it themselves. Pretty early on in my career, I had a conversation with my boss that really stuck in my memory. I was getting hugely frustrated on a particular project because I believed we should be doing it in one way, and the leadership of the organization had a very kind of different view. And my boss said to me, Sally, you need to understand the difference between accountability and responsibility. If you decide how to do something, you're accountable for the plan, for the outcome, for everything about it. But if someone else is telling you how to do it, then they're saying, then you're just responsible. You just need to do as you're being told, do as they say. I stopped moaning, I delivered the project, but that conversation stayed with me for years. And I often think about it when I'm managing teams. The really important distinction between accountability, which is ownership of the outcome, versus responsibility, which is ownership of the execution. For a team to succeed, they need to have accountability for the outcome. But how do you find that balance? How do you create accountability within your teams, but at the same time ensure that they do what you need them to do? Well, I found OKRs to be a really powerful tool for doing that in a number of organizations that I've worked in. And I'm not going to explain them here because I'm sure you've heard of them before, but also there's like a lot out there to read. And if you have done some reading about them, you'll know that actually it's also quite easy to get them wrong and to actually achieve the opposite to what you were trying to achieve. Teams who have accountability create their own OKRs. So at Go Compare, we, the leadership team, don't set the OKRs. What we do is we create a series of what we call strategic pillars. And those are key things that we need to achieve based on the P&L and where we've said we'll be kind of for the quarter or the year. So it might be something like increased conversion, and we might give a rate or a level on that. And then it's up to the teams to work out what the objectives are that will ladder up to deliver on that. And they are working out the best way to achieve that. And then the individual squads set the key results. So they set the levels that they believe that they can achieve. The second thing you need to make sure that you get right about objectives and key results, and this is very important as the leader of the team, is making sure that your objective is a good objective. And to be a good objective, it has to have a business or customer outcome. An example of a bad objective would be something like launch social login or roll out this or that. Because what you get from that type of bad objective is you get a feature team, a team who are just focused on doing the thing rather than on delivering an outcome. A much better example of that, a much better objective based on that example I shared a moment ago might be something like increase successful logins on mobile, and then you'd give a key result of by 50% within a period of time, so let's say a quarter. And these types of objectives based on a business outcome or customer problem, free the team up to work out what the best way is to solve the problem, rather than dictating a solution at them. And as a result of that, they own the outcome. And that's really what you want, right? For your business is you want, and for your customers is the outcome. So we have a vision, we have a team who can see how to get there. And the next thing that we need to be able to see through our magic goggles is that our teams are constantly focused on how well they are doing. And that starts with living and breathing that objective or that OKR, that goal, or whatever it is that you work with. At my previous company, our CEO used to do this thing which we started calling the elevator test. And what would happen is he'd get in the lift, and whoever was in the lift with him, he would say to them, what is your OKR? Where have you got to on it? And how confident are you at setting it? It led to a lot of people taking the stairs, but you get the point, right? It's this kind of obsession with how well am I doing against a thing that I'm setting out to do. Now, at Go Compare, we do it a bit differently. We have fortnightly squad reviews, and what happens there is that the teams, be those engineering and product teams or engineering and marketing teams, or even just teams that are using our squad format, present the work that they've been doing. And all of that work starts with a reminder of the objective they're trying to achieve, the key result for measuring that, and how well they're doing with that. And in those squad reviews, we expect them to tell us what's going wrong as much as they're telling us what's going right and the things that they're worried about, because that's obviously the whole point, is for us to be able to help and to make those teams successful. But teams who succeed don't just look at their outputs as a measure of their performance. They also look at the performance of the team themselves. So they worry about whether they are functioning well as a team. At Photobox, I got to work with two really great agile coaches called David Shrimpton and Dan Ashby, and you should go and look them up. They've both been working on some very interesting models that help teams to measure their maturity. And what they did at Photobox was they worked with each of the individual squads, and they had their own models, but you can also find lots of other models available that allow the teams to map their maturity against all sorts of different criteria like communication, collaboration, that type of thing. And then the teams would review that and decide what they wanted to focus on. And that was, they would then work specifically on a particular area, and then they would report back on that in their squad reviews as well. The key thing there is that you can see your teams measuring their own performance in addition to their outcomes. So you're looking at the same vision. We can see the steps on how to get there. You've got good visibility of the progress. The next thing you need to be able to see through your magic goggles is that your teams can adapt. And to do that, we're going to go way back in time to an era just after the dinosaurs, i.e. the pre-Uber era. In May 2017, these two guys, Logan Green and John Zimmer, founded a company that you might not have heard of called Zimride. And they had connected and bonded over their kind of shared concerns about cities. Basically, they felt like cities were designed around cars that were parked in them rather than the people that lived in them. And they had this vision for future cities in which you didn't need to own a car. You could basically share cars, and it would massively change the way that we lived in cities. So they'd really bonded over this, and they developed this product called Zimride. And basically it was a tool that was offered to universities that enabled them to do matchmaking between people who wanted a ride home for the weekend and people who had cars. And they were incredibly successful. They closed several rounds, including a 6 million Series A in 2011. And yet, in 2011, they also stopped completely, and they asked themselves how it was going. How well were they delivering against that original vision? And they also asked themselves, what would they do differently if they started again? And that was a really important question, because between 2007, when they first launched, and 2011, the smartphone had become ubiquitous, and the world had changed considerably as a result. So focused on that same vision of a different kind of a city in which there's lower car ownership, they went back to the drawing board, and they came up with a totally revised concept. And that concept was called Lyft, an app that they built in 6 weeks, which allowed a user to request a ride to anywhere, from anywhere, in someone else's car. Just like what Uber copied not that long afterwards, because until then, Uber had been focused on the whole kind of limo thing. Lyft IPO'd at 22.2 billion, by the way. And that's the signal of a successful team that you're looking for, that ability to adapt to information, to take in and to switch direction neatly, but also that they have the ability to stop doing things. And this is really critically important, because it is very, very, very difficult for teams who have accountability and who are passionately committed to delivering on their vision to stop doing something, to acknowledge that it is no longer the right path, and to move on to something else. That moment for Zimride was pretty massive, right? That big pivot. You don't get very many of those, either in a company or a product's lifestyle. So how do we spot this type of thing on a day-to-day basis? What are the signs we should look for in our team? So first of all, we should see that they are using data to make decisions. And this is really important, right? And the easiest way to tell this is just through the questions that you ask your team, because the way that they should be responding to you when you ask them a question is not with opinion or I think or in my opinion or perhaps. Is you want to hear data as a response to your questions, or you want to hear a hypothesis that the team have that they are currently gathering data against. And then you want them to question and validate that data. So a few weeks ago, we relaunched our home insurance journey, and the results were really good. About 25% increase in the number of people who were completing that journey kind of within a couple of days. And we were like, whoa, that's really good, right? No, that is a bit too good. And that's exactly what the team was suspicious about, because we had done some major improvements to the UX and kind of made the UI nice and consistent, but there was no ways that anything we'd done was going to drive a 25% improvement or change in user behavior. And so of course they kept digging until they found the tagging problem. As a leader of a team, it's your role to ensure that your teams have access to the information that they need to make database decisions. So do they have customer research, they have market research, what tools provide them with data from your products? Teams that use data to drive their decision-making succeed, both because they use that data to reinforce the direction they're going in, and then also to adapt and change it when they need to. Sometimes there are enormous and complex problems between us and our vision. And there might be industry changing business models or complicated market fit. And what you want to see through your goggles is that your teams are tackling these difficult problems. Here's an example of that from another business that you've probably heard about, Five Guys. It was founded in Arlington, Virginia by Jerry and Janie Murrell, and this sounds like many years ago, right? And in many ways, they were a proper kind of lean startup before lean startup even started, because they had almost no capital, and so they needed to be really frugal about how they did things. But they had to choose somewhere to open their first restaurant, and at that point, they were just thinking about one restaurant. And they thought really hard about it because it had a lot of options. Arlington's pretty big; there's a lot of different places they could go. And in the end, they settled on a location that was pretty much out of the way. It wasn't close to anywhere. It wasn't any kind of passing footfall. And the reason that they did that was because they figured that if people made the effort to come to this location, found out about them and came to this location to buy their burgers, then they were never going to fail, because they would have succeeded in doing the hardest thing possible. That was a really long time ago now, but as I'm sure you know, there's now 3,000 Five Guys around the world, and it's been incredibly successful burger chain. And the thing that's interesting about that example is that they designed the test to fail. They solved the hardest thing first. To enable this, you as the leader have to create what I call a science lab space. Now, in a science lab, you create experiments to learn. And you fully expect that the majority of those experiments are going to fail. Also, in a science lab, you get to wear goggles, which is, on brand with this talk. But the thing here is that if you learn to do something, that's a success in itself. And if the next step is to learn, then you can't fail. Another thing that you and your teams can do in this area, and to help you tackle the hard stuff first, is what's called a pre-mortem. And that's before you start a project, you all get in a room if you can, or you all get together and you decide, you think about a failed scenario in which the project hasn't succeeded or the product hasn't succeeded. And you try and work out what are the things we would have done along the way that would meant that product has failed. And then you work back from there, and you design your approach to the product or the project in a way that means you hopefully never get to that fail scenario. I want to come back to Zimride again for a moment to tell you about the best indicator that your team is going to succeed. When they first launched, they were a whole new category of thing. There was no regulatory or legislative framework to govern private vehicles carrying passengers or charging for a ride in their car. It just didn't exist. And America, where they launched, is obviously a very pretty complex legislative environment, shall we say. But instead of kind of being stopped or giving up, what they did was they made payment voluntary for the first few years, because that meant that it was legal and they could get started. And they then worked for years, literally years, with local and national governments to get the legislation changed so that what they were doing would be possible. And the main thing there is that they found a way to take a step forward. And I call that finding a way forward. And it's my number one mantra, and it's my number one signal of team health, is like, do you see people encountering problems and then finding out different ways to take steps around those problems? Anyone that I've worked with will tell you that I go on about this all the time, finding a way forward, taking a step, learning something new and keeping going. Finally, the real secret, the true magic of the goggles, is that if you want your team to deliver, if you want them to really succeed, the thing you need to look at to understand whether they are going to win or lose is you. And to illustrate that, I want to tell you one last story, a story about how poor leadership wasted a ton of money and also created a ton of money and also resulted in a very strange little piece of pub quiz trivia, which is that Prince George and Princess Charlotte have both got one of these commemorative christening coins, whereas Prince Louis hasn't got one and will never have one. And that's because Princess Charlotte was never supposed to have one. Hopefully you're a little bit intrigued now, but let me tell you the story. Okay, so in 2015, there was something very big going on at the Royal Mint, and that was that they were changing the portrait of the Queen on the coins. Now, it only happened over 4 times before in the history of the world ever, so, or in the history of the Queen's reign. So something happened sort of every 20 years. And the illustration for the new one was being done by someone internally. So there was a lot of excitement. Like, I'm not exaggerating or being sarcastic when I say it was a massive deal for the Royal Mint. And so what they decided to do is they decided to produce a commemorative range of coins. And this is one of the big ways in which the Royal Mint makes its money. It was going to be a very high pressurized project. It usually take about 2 years to do something like this, but they had 4 months. So the product team went away, they did a ton of research, they looked at feasibility, etc. And they came back and they said, here's the range we should do, and here's how many we should produce. And the leadership team looked at this proposal and they decided it wasn't good enough. And these leaders said they thought the product team who'd come up with this proposal were really underestimating how much excitement there was going to be over the change in the portrait from 4 to 5. Yes, really. And so the leadership team overrode everything that the team had done. And they massively increased the product. They changed the scale of the commemorative range, and they massively increased the volumes that were going to be manufactured. And you know where this is going, right? Because 3 weeks later into launch, it was clear the sales weren't going to go anywhere near what they were expected, and they were left with this massive multi-million-pound hole in their budget and their forecast. Plus, a huge amount of stock on the shelves, which obviously later had to get scrapped at more cost to the business. So what to do? Well, at this point, the team leadership decided to plug the hole in the financial plan by releasing another new coin range, this time with a 2-month turnaround to celebrate the conveniently timed christening of darling Princess Charlotte. The number one reason why your team will succeed or fail is because they have you. So next time you pick up a coin and you see that portrait of the Queen, stop for a minute. Remember that story and ask yourself, how am I leading my team today? Because if your team can see the vision, they have a plan to get there, they're measuring themselves, they're using data to make decisions, they're adapting to that information, they're finding ways forward, and you are still telling them what to do, then magic goggles are not going to help you, because what you need is magic ears, and that is another whole talk. Thank you.